She had always loved the sound of piano keys long before she ever touched one. When she was little, she would pause whenever she heard music playing from a neighbor's house or from a television commercial. While other children ran outside to play, she sometimes sat near the window just to listen. There was something about the way the notes rose and fell that made her feel calm, like the world made sense for a few quiet minutes. Her family did not have much money. There was no grand piano in the living room, no private lessons, no music tutors visiting the house every week. The only instrument she had was a small, old keyboard someone had given them years ago. A few keys did not work properly. The sound was slightly off, but to her it was enough. She learned by watching free videos online. She would replay the same lesson again and again, carefully observing where the fingers moved. Sometimes she would pause the video and copy the hand position in the air before trying it on her keyboard. It was slow work. There was no one to correct her posture or guide her rhythm. When she made mistakes, she had to figure them out alone. Still, she practiced almost every day. At school, she was known as the quiet girl. She did not talk much in class unless she was asked a question. She preferred to sit near the back and listen. She was not the top student, but she worked hard. Most teachers described her as polite and respectful. The school had a strong music program. Many students had been learning instruments since childhood. Some came from families where music was a tradition. Their performances during assemblies were always impressive. She admired them from a distance but never imagined she could stand where they stood. One afternoon, a notice was placed on the classroom board. The annual school music showcase was coming soon. Students could audition for a chance to perform in front of the entire school and invited parents. It was the biggest event of the year. When she read the announcement, her heart beat faster. For a few seconds, she just stared at the paper. A small voice inside her whispered, "Try." But almost immediately, another voice answered, "You're not good enough." She folded the thought away and went home quietly that day. While doing homework, her eyes kept drifting toward the old keyboard in the corner of the room. The idea would not leave her mind. She imagined herself sitting on the stage, bright lights above her, fingers moving across real piano keys. The image both excited and scared her. Later that evening, she sat down at her keyboard and began playing a piece she had been practicing for weeks. It was not easy. There were fast sections that required quick finger movement and softer parts that demanded control. She had stumbled many times before, but that night something felt different. She played with more focus, more feeling. When she finished, she stayed still for a moment. Her hands rested on the keys. Her heart was racing. Without giving herself time to change her mind, she decided she would audition. The next day, she wrote her name on the audition list outside the music room. Her handwriting looked small compared to the bold signatures of other students. As soon as she stepped back, she felt nervous. What if she embarrassed herself? What if everyone laughed? The first practice session for auditioning students was held after school. When she entered the music room, she saw several confident students already warming up. Some were playing advanced pieces with smooth technique. Their fingers moved quickly and precisely. She felt a tight knot in her stomach. The music teacher stood near the piano, listening carefully to each student. He had a reputation for being strict. He believed in discipline and high standards. Many students respected him, but some were afraid of his sharp comments. When it was her turn to practice, she walked slowly to the piano. Her palms felt slightly sweaty. She adjusted the bench the way she had seen others do and placed her fingers on the keys. She began to play. At first, the notes came out soft but steady. She focused on keeping her hands relaxed. But halfway through the piece, she made a mistake. One note sounded wrong. Then another. Her timing slipped slightly. The teacher raised his hand to stop her. "That's enough," he said calmly, but his voice carried across the room. Her cheeks grew warm. "You are choosing a very difficult piece," he continued. "Do you have formal training?" She shook her head gently. He sighed. "It shows. Your technique is weak and your timing is unstable. This level of performance requires strong foundation. You may want to reconsider." A few students exchanged glances. Someone in the back whispered something that made another student giggle. She felt like the room was shrinking around her. "I suggest you pick something much simpler," the teacher added. "Otherwise, you will struggle on stage." She nodded quietly and returned to her seat. The rest of the practice passed in a blur. She barely heard the other performances. Her mind replayed the teacher's words again and again. Weak technique. Unstable timing. Reconsider. When she walked home that evening, the sky looked gray even though it was not raining. She kept her head down. The excitement she had felt just days earlier now seemed foolish. Maybe she had aimed too high. Maybe she had misunderstood her own abilities. At home, her family noticed she was unusually quiet during dinner. When asked about her day, she simply said it was fine. She did not want to explain what had happened. She was not angry at the teacher. She was embarrassed at herself. Later that night, she stood in front of the keyboard but did not sit down. She stared at it for a long time. The teacher's voice echoed in her head. Weak technique. For a moment, she considered removing her name from the audition list the next day. No one would blame her. It would save her from more embarrassment. But as she turned away, she remembered why she loved the piano in the first place. It was never about impressing others. It was about the feeling she had when the music flowed correctly, when the notes connected smoothly and created something beautiful. Slowly, she sat down. She placed her fingers on the keys and began again from the beginning of the piece. This time she moved more carefully. When she reached the difficult section, she stopped and repeated it slowly, over and over, each time a little cleaner. She practiced until her fingers felt tired. In the days that followed, she returned to the music room for more rehearsal sessions. The teacher did not say much to her anymore. He focused more attention on students who were clearly advanced. She felt almost invisible, but in a strange way that gave her space. While others practiced casually, she listened carefully to every correction the teacher gave them. Even when the advice was not directed at her, she applied it to herself. She adjusted her hand position. She worked on controlling the pressure of each finger. She paid attention to rhythm. Some students still doubted her. She could sense it in the way they looked at her when she sat at the piano. But she stopped trying to read their expressions. Instead, she focused on the sound. One afternoon, after another practice session, she stayed behind for a few extra minutes. The room was nearly empty. Sunlight streamed softly through the windows. She played the entire piece from start to finish without stopping. There were still small imperfections, but something had changed. The music felt more connected, more alive. For the first time since the teacher's criticism, she felt a quiet spark of hope. She was not perfect. She knew that. She did not have years of professional lessons behind her. But she had something else. Patience, love for the music, and a deep determination that no one else could see. As the audition day grew closer, fear still visited her from time to time. Yet it no longer controlled her. Each practice session built a small layer of confidence. The teacher may have doubted her skills. Some classmates may have expected her to fail. But she was not ready to give up. Not yet. The day of the official audition arrived faster than she expected. She had imagined this moment so many times in her head, but now that it was real, her stomach felt tight. The music room looked different that afternoon. The chairs were arranged neatly in rows, and a few teachers sat at the back with clipboards. The piano stood at the center, polished and serious, as if it were waiting to test every student who touched it. Students whispered among themselves while waiting for their turn. Some looked calm and confident, stretching their fingers or softly tapping rhythms on their knees. Others paced back and forth. She sat quietly in the second row, her hands folded together. She could feel her heartbeat in her palms. When her name was called, it felt like the air suddenly became thinner. She stood up slowly and walked toward the piano. The sound of her footsteps seemed louder than usual. She could sense eyes following her. A few students exchanged looks, remembering her earlier practice session. She avoided looking at anyone directly. She adjusted the bench just like she had practiced at home. She placed her hands gently on the keys. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began. The first few notes came out soft and careful. She tried to focus only on the music. For a short while it felt steady. But then, during a faster section, her fingers slipped slightly. One note sounded uneven. She tried to correct it quickly, but the mistake made her nervous. Her timing became shaky. Before she could regain full control, the teacher raised his hand again. "That's enough," he said firmly. The room went silent. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The teacher stood up and walked closer to the piano. His expression was serious, not angry, but clearly disappointed. "You see," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is exactly what I meant. This piece demands strong technical control. You are not ready for it." Her throat felt dry. She stared at the piano keys, unable to respond. "You have passion," he continued. "But passion alone is not enough. There are students here who have trained for years. You need to understand your level." A quiet murmur spread across the room. Some students avoided eye contact. Others watched openly. "I advise you to choose something much simpler," he said. "Otherwise, performing this on stage will only embarrass you." The word embarrass echoed in her mind. She nodded slightly, even though her chest felt heavy. She walked back to her seat, each step slower than the last. The auditions continued, but she barely heard the other performances. Her ears felt blocked by her own thoughts. She kept replaying the moment when he stopped her. She knew she had made mistakes. She could not deny that. But hearing it spoken in front of everyone made the failure feel bigger. After the session ended, students gathered their bags and began leaving in small groups. Some were excited, talking about how well they had played. A few glanced at her briefly before walking away. She packed her things quietly. As she reached the door, she heard the teacher call her name. She paused and turned back. "Wait a moment," he said. Her heart dropped again. She walked toward him, unsure of what to expect. He looked at her with a more neutral expression now. "I am not trying to discourage you," he said. "But you must be realistic. If you perform at the showcase and it goes badly, it will affect your confidence even more." She listened silently. "You should build your foundation first," he added. "Perhaps next year you will be ready." Next year. The words felt distant. A whole year suddenly seemed like a very long time. "Think about what I said," he finished. She nodded once more and left the room. Outside, the hallway felt unusually bright. Students were laughing and talking about other things, as if nothing important had happened. But for her, the world felt slightly different. On the walk home, her thoughts were loud and confusing. Part of her felt angry, not at the teacher exactly, but at herself. Why had she chosen such a difficult piece? Why couldn't her fingers move the way she wanted them to? Another part of her felt small. Maybe he was right. Maybe she did not belong on that stage. When she reached home, she went straight to her room. She did not turn on the lights. She sat on her bed and stared at the wall. Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She did not want anyone to see her like that. After a while, she stood up and walked toward the keyboard. She turned it on but did not play. The keys looked the same as always, but her confidence felt different. She pressed a single note. It echoed softly in the quiet room. She thought about removing her name from the audition list the next morning. It would be simple. No one would question it. In fact, some might even expect it. But something inside her resisted that idea. She remembered the feeling she had when she first decided to audition. It was not about proving others wrong. It was about challenging herself. If she quit now, she would always wonder what could have happened. Still, doubt was heavy. That evening, her family noticed she was unusually silent again. When asked if everything was okay, she hesitated. For a moment, she considered saying nothing. But then she quietly explained what had happened during the audition. They listened without interrupting. After she finished, there was no long lecture, no dramatic reaction. Just simple words. "If you love it, don't stop," someone said gently. The sentence was not loud or emotional, but it stayed with her. Later that night, she sat at the keyboard again. This time, instead of playing the entire piece, She focused only on the section where she had struggled. She slowed it down until it almost sounded too simple. She repeated it again and again. Her fingers moved carefully. When she made a mistake, she did not slam the keys in frustration. She paused, corrected her hand position, and tried again. Minutes turned into an hour. Gradually, the notes became clearer. The next day at school, she felt nervous about facing everyone. She expected whispers or judgment. But surprisingly, most students were busy with their own lives. The world had not stopped because of her mistake. When she passed by the audition list, she stood there for a moment. Her name was still written in small letters among the others. Her hand lifted slightly. Then she stepped back. She left it there. During the next rehearsal session, she returned to the piano. Some students looked mildly surprised to see her again. The teacher did not say anything at first. When it was her turn to practice, she began playing. This time, she did not rush. She remembered every correction she had given herself the night before. Her fingers felt more stable, though not perfect. The teacher listened carefully. She finished the piece without being stopped. There was a brief silence. "It is better," he admitted, "but still not strong enough for the main showcase." His tone was less sharp than before, but the message was the same. "You may be placed as a backup performer," he added, "in case someone withdraws." Backup. It was not the main stage. It was not the recognition she had imagined. But it was not rejection either. She nodded. As she returned to her seat, she felt a mix of emotions. Part of her felt disappointed. Another part felt slightly proud. She had improved. Even the teacher had noticed. The journey was clearly not going to be easy, but she was beginning to understand something important. The embarrassment she feared so much had not destroyed her. The criticism had not ended her dream. It had hurt, yes, but it had also shown her exactly where she needed to grow. That realization changed something inside her. Instead of practicing to prove the teacher wrong, she started practicing to become better than she was yesterday. The showcase was still days away. There was still time. And this time she was not practicing with fear. She was practicing with purpose. After being placed as a backup performer, she felt a strange mix of disappointment and relief. She had not been completely rejected, but she had also not earned the spot she truly wanted. For a few hours, she let herself feel that quiet sadness. She did not pretend it didn't matter. It did matter. It mattered a lot. But later that evening, while sitting alone in her room, she began to see things differently. Being a backup meant she still had a chance. It was a small chance, yes, but it was not zero. She turned on the old keyboard and sat down without overthinking. Instead of starting from the beginning of the piece, she jumped straight to the hardest section. The part that had caused her trouble from the first practice. The part that had made the teacher stop her mid-performance. Her fingers hovered above the keys. This time she did not rush. She pressed each note slowly, carefully listening to the sound. She paid attention to how her wrists moved. She noticed that when she kept her hands too stiff, the notes sounded heavy. When she relaxed slightly, the sound became smoother. She repeated the same 4 measures again and again. At first it felt boring. The same notes, the same rhythm, over and over. But after several tries, she began to feel a shift. Her fingers were learning. The movement was becoming natural instead of forced. She decided to record herself on her phone. When she played it back, she heard mistakes she had not noticed while playing. Some notes were uneven. Some transitions were too sharp. Instead of feeling discouraged, she wrote down small notes for herself on a piece of paper. Slow down here. Relax left hand. Count carefully. The next day at school, she carried those notes folded in her pocket. During lunch break, while others gathered in groups and laughed, she quietly entered the empty music room. She had asked permission to practice during free periods, and the teacher had agreed without much interest. She sat at the school piano and began again. The sound of the Real piano felt different from her keyboard at home. The keys were heavier. The tone was richer. At first it surprised her. But then she adjusted. She focused on control. A few students passed by the open door and glanced inside. Some looked curious. Others simply kept walking. She no longer cared as much about their reactions. Her world, for those minutes, was only the piano and the sound it created. Days passed like this. She woke up early before school and practiced softly at home. After school, she stayed behind whenever she could. At night, she reviewed her recordings and corrected herself. Her fingers began to ache slightly from the extra hours. One evening, she noticed a small red mark on her fingertip from pressing the keys repeatedly. She smiled to herself. It was not painful enough to stop her. It was simply proof of effort. Meanwhile, whispers still floated around her. Some students wondered why she kept trying when she was only a backup. Others assumed she would never actually perform. A few even said she was being stubborn. But none of them saw the quiet progress happening behind the scenes. One afternoon, while she was practicing alone, the teacher walked into the music room unexpectedly. She did not notice him at first. She was too focused on a soft middle section of her piece. He stood near the door, listening. Her playing was not perfect, but it was steady. Her timing was stronger. The once messy section now flowed with much more control. When she finished, she looked up and saw him standing there. Her heart jumped slightly. "I didn't know you were here," she said softly. "I can see that," he replied. There was a short silence. "You've improved," he said after a moment. The words surprised her. "Thank you," she answered. "You are practicing more," he observed. She nodded. He walked closer to the piano. "Show me the difficult section again." She took a breath and began playing that part. Her hands trembled slightly at first, but she steadied herself. When she finished, he did not interrupt. "You still rush the last measure," he pointed out. "But your control is better." Instead of feeling criticized, she felt grateful. The correction felt specific, helpful. He adjusted her wrist position gently and explained how to balance the weight of her hands. "Technique is not just speed," he said. "It is control." She listened carefully, absorbing every word. After that day, something shifted between them. He was still strict, still demanding, but he no longer dismissed her so quickly. He began offering small corrections during rehearsals. She noticed it. Others noticed it too. One of the main performers suddenly fell sick during the week before the showcase. Rumors spread quickly through the school. There was uncertainty about whether that student would recover in time. For the first time, the possibility of her stepping onto the main stage felt real. Instead of feeling scared, she felt ready. That evening, she practiced with even more focus. Not out of pressure, but preparation. She imagined the auditorium filled with people. She pictured the bright lights. She imagined hearing her own heartbeat before starting. Instead of letting the image frighten her, she used it as motivation. She also worked on something new, expression. Up until now, she had been so focused on avoiding mistakes that she sometimes forgot the emotion behind the music. Now that her technical control was stronger, she allowed herself to feel the piece. During the softer parts, she played gently, almost like whispering. During the stronger sections, she let the notes rise confidently. Her family began noticing the difference in her sound. It was no longer just correct. It was expressive. One evening, after finishing a full run of the piece, she sat back and realized she had played it from start to finish without a major mistake. Her eyes widened slightly. She played it again to be sure. It wasn't flawless, but it was strong. A quiet smile appeared on her face. At school, rehearsals became more serious as the showcase approached. The teacher gathered all performers, including backups, for a full run-through in the auditorium. When she stepped onto the stage for rehearsal, her breath caught for a moment. The space was larger than she imagined. The rows of empty seats stretched out in front of her. She walked to the piano and sat down. For a second, she remembered the first time she had been stopped mid-performance. The embarrassment, the whispers, but this time felt different. She began playing. The sound echoed beautifully in the large room. Her fingers moved with confidence she had built through countless hours of repetition. She focused on the teacher's advice about control and balance. When she finished, The silence in the empty auditorium felt peaceful, not heavy. The teacher nodded once. "Good," he said simply. It was not dramatic praise, but coming from him it meant something. As the showcase day drew closer, she realized that whether she performed as a backup or a main performer, she had already changed. She was no longer the girl who trembled at the first mistake. She was someone who faced criticism and chose to grow from it. The fear that once controlled her had become fuel. She still felt nervous sometimes. That was normal. But beneath the nerves was something stronger, belief. For the first time, she truly believed that if she was called to perform, she would not disappoint herself. And that belief was more powerful than anything anyone had said about her skills before. The morning of the showcase arrived with a strange stillness. She woke up earlier than usual, even before her alarm rang. For a few seconds, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Then it hit her. Today was the day. Her heart began to beat faster, not in fear, but in awareness. Everything she had worked for over the past weeks was leading to this moment. She got ready slowly, carefully choosing simple clothes that made her feel comfortable but neat. She did not want anything distracting her. While brushing her hair, she looked at herself in the mirror and tried to steady her breathing. "You've done the work," she whispered softly to her reflection. At school, the energy felt completely different from a normal day. Students were buzzing with excitement. Posters for the showcase were placed along the hallways. Teachers walked quickly from one room to another, organizing final details. When she entered the auditorium for the final rehearsal, the stage lights were already set up. The piano stood under a soft spotlight, polished and ready. It looked almost intimidating in its importance. Backstage, performers gathered in small groups. Some were laughing loudly to hide their nerves. Others sat quietly reviewing their music sheets one last time. She stood slightly apart, not because she felt unwelcome, but because she needed space to think. Then the news spread quietly among the group. The main piano performer was still unwell and would not be able to perform that evening. A few students gasped softly. The teacher called her name. For a brief second, she thought she had imagined it. He looked directly at her. "You will perform tonight." The words seemed to echo in her mind. She nodded slowly, trying to appear calm. Inside, her thoughts were racing. This was the moment she had prepared for, yet it still felt sudden. "Be ready," he added. All afternoon, time moved strangely. Classes felt longer. Conversations around her sounded distant. She kept replaying the opening notes of her piece in her mind, almost like a silent rehearsal. When evening came, the auditorium began to fill. Parents, students, and staff took their seats. The low hum of conversation created a warm but nervous atmosphere. Backstage, she could hear the audience settling in. She flexed her fingers gently, trying to keep them relaxed. Her palms felt slightly cool. She closed her eyes for a moment and remembered the countless hours she had practiced alone in her room. The old keyboard, the late nights, the corrections, the improvement. This stage was not a surprise. It was earned. The program began. One by one, performers stepped onto the stage. Applause followed each act. From behind the curtain, she watched carefully, noticing how each student handled their nerves differently. Then she heard her name announced. The sound of applause reached her ears as she stepped forward. The stage lights felt bright, but not blinding. She walked toward the piano with steady steps. The auditorium seemed larger now, filled with faces instead of empty chairs. She sat down and adjusted the bench slowly. The movement gave her a few extra seconds to breathe. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to look out at the audience. She saw teachers, classmates, and families. Some faces looked curious. Some looked neutral. A few seemed surprised. She wondered if anyone remembered the day she had been stopped mid-performance. Then she looked back at the piano. Her hands hovered above the keys. There was a tiny tremble in her fingers. She did not fight it. She simply placed them gently on the keys and took one deep breath. Then she began. The first notes were soft and controlled. The sound carried smoothly through the auditorium. She focused on her breathing, letting it guide her tempo. As she moved into the next section, she felt her nerves slowly fade. Her fingers remembered what to do. The hours of repetition took over. The difficult section approached. For a split second, she felt the memory of past mistakes. But instead of fear, she felt readiness. Her hands moved confidently through the notes. Each transition flowed into the next. Her wrists stayed relaxed, just as she had practiced. The sound was clear and balanced. In the audience, people leaned slightly forward. She did not notice the shift in their expressions. She was too focused on the music. She allowed herself to feel the emotion of the piece now. The softer parts felt gentle and reflective. The stronger passages carried quiet strength. Her confidence grew with every measure. The teacher sat near the side of the stage, watching closely. His arms were no longer folded tightly. His expression was focused, attentive. As she reached the final section, her heart began to beat faster again. Not from fear, but from intensity. She pressed into the keys with controlled power, letting the music rise and fill the room. The final notes rang out clearly. Then silence. It lasted only a second, but it felt longer. She lifted her hands slowly from the keys. And then the applause began. It started as a few claps, then quickly grew louder. The sound filled the auditorium. She looked up, slightly surprised by the strength of it. Some students who had once whispered about her were clapping enthusiastically. Teachers nodded with approval. Even from the stage, she could see genuine expressions of admiration. She stood up carefully and gave a small bow, her face warm but smiling. As she walked off the stage, her legs felt slightly weak, not from fear, but from relief. She had done it. Not perfectly, but confidently. Backstage, a few performers smiled at her. "That was amazing," someone said softly. She thanked them quietly, still processing what had just happened. The teacher approached her after the performance. For a moment, she wondered what he would say. "You handled yourself well," he said. "That was strong." It was not a dramatic speech, but it was sincere. "Thank you," she replied. The rest of the showcase continued, but her mind felt light. The heavy doubt that once sat in her chest was gone. In its place was something steady and calm. Later, when the program ended and people began leaving, several parents complimented her performance. A few students who had never spoken to her before smiled and said they enjoyed her piece. She responded politely, still humble. When she finally stepped outside into the cool night air, she looked up at the sky, felt strangely peaceful. She thought about the girl who had once sat in the music room feeling embarrassed and unsure. That version of herself seemed distant now. Not because she had suddenly become perfect, but because she had refused to quit. As she walked home, the sound of her own performance replayed in her mind. Not the mistakes from weeks ago, not the criticism, the clear, confident notes from tonight. And for the first time, she truly believed that her skills were not something to hide or doubt. They were something to grow, and this was only the beginning. The applause that night did not end when she stepped off the stage. It followed her into the hallway, into small conversations, into quiet smiles from people who had never noticed her before. Even after the auditorium lights were turned off and the chairs were folded away, something from that performance stayed in the air. The next morning at school felt different. When she walked through the main gate, she expected everything to go back to normal. She expected to return to being the quiet girl who sat near the back of the classroom. But as she moved down the hallway, a few students turned toward her. "That was really good," someone said as she passed. "I didn't know you could play like that," another added. Their voices were not teasing. They were genuine. She smiled politely and thanked them, still not fully used to the attention. Inside, she felt a soft warmth. Not pride in a loud way, but a quiet satisfaction. She had worked hard for that moment. The applause was simply the result. During music class that day, the atmosphere carried a subtle shift. The teacher entered as usual, serious and focused. But before beginning the lesson, he paused. "I want to acknowledge last night's performances," he said. "Many of you showed dedication and growth." His eyes briefly met hers before he continued speaking. She kept her gaze steady, not looking away this time. The lesson moved on, but she noticed something new. When students practiced in small groups, a few of them asked her questions. How did you control the fast section? Were you nervous? How long did you practice? She answered honestly. She did not exaggerate her effort or pretend it had been easy. She told them about slowing down difficult parts, recording herself and repeating sections until they felt natural. For the first time, she was not the one silently observing others. People were listening to her. Later that week, the teacher asked her to stay back after class. Her heart did not race with fear this time. She walked to his desk calmly. Yes? She asked. He leaned back slightly in his chair. I misjudged you, he said plainly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. I saw your early mistakes and assumed that was your limit, he continued. I did not expect that level of improvement in such a short time. She listened quietly. I pushed you to reconsider performing, he added, perhaps too strongly. She thought back to the day he had stopped her mid-performance. The embarrassment, the whispers, the heavy feeling in her chest. It was hard to hear, she admitted gently. He nodded. I believe in high standards, but sometimes I forget that growth matters more than perfection. There was no dramatic apology, no emotional speech, just honesty. I am glad you didn't quit, he said. So am I, she replied softly. As she left the classroom, she realized something important. His early criticism had hurt her deeply, but without it, she might not have pushed herself as far. She did not see him as the villain anymore. She saw him as someone who had learned a lesson too. In the following days, something else began to change. The music room no longer felt intimidating. Felt like a place where she belonged. She started helping a younger student who struggled with rhythm. She showed them how to count slowly and use a metronome app on their phone. You don't have to rush, she said kindly. Speed comes later. The advice sounded familiar. It was the same thing she had told herself many times. Word about her performance continued spreading beyond her class. A short video clip from the showcase had been shared in the school group chat. It showed her during the strongest section of her piece, hands moving confidently, expression focused. Students who had not attended the event watched it. Some of them were surprised. One afternoon, a classmate who had once giggled during her early practice approached her. I didn't think you were ready back then, the student admitted. But you proved everyone wrong. She paused before answering. I wasn't ready back then, she said honestly. But I worked on it. That was the truth. She had not magically transformed overnight. The performance was built on small improvements, one difficult measure at a time. At home, her family noticed the difference in her posture and voice. She seemed more confident, more steady. She still practiced daily, but now there was joy in her playing, not pressure. One evening, while she was practicing, she stopped mid-piece and smiled. The music felt natural now, not forced, not tense. She realized that the biggest change had not happened on stage. It had happened inside her. Before the showcase, she had constantly doubted herself. She measured her abilities against others and always found herself lacking. Now, she compared herself only to who she had been weeks ago, and the difference was clear. A few weeks later, the teacher announced a small community event where selected students would perform again. This time, he invited her directly to participate. There was no backup position, no hesitation. You've earned it, he said. She nodded, feeling a calm excitement rather than fear. During rehearsals for that event, she noticed how differently the teacher interacted with her. His corrections were still firm, but they were balanced with encouragement. Good control, he would say. Now shape the phrase more. She accepted feedback without feeling attacked. She understood that improvement never really ends. On the evening of the community performance, the audience was smaller but more intimate. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt ready. Not because she expected applause, but because she trusted herself. After that performance, an elderly woman approached her with kind eyes. You play with feeling, the woman said. Don't lose that. Those words stayed with her. Back at school, she noticed something even more meaningful. Students who once doubted themselves began trying harder in their own areas. One student joined the art competition after seeing her improvement. Another signed up for debate club despite being shy. Her courage had quietly influenced others. She never intended to become an example. She had simply wanted to prove something to herself. One afternoon, while sitting alone in the music room after practice, she reflected on everything that had happened. The embarrassment, the criticism, the late nights, the applause. If she could go back to the first day she was stopped mid-performance, would she change it? She thought for a moment. No, because that moment had pushed her to discover what she was capable of. The teacher entered the room briefly and paused near the door. "You've grown," he said. She smiled slightly. "So have you." He gave a small nod, understanding exactly what she meant. As she continued practicing, her fingers moved across the keys with confidence that no one could take away from her now. Not because she was flawless, not because she was the best, but because she had faced doubt and chosen effort over fear. And that choice had changed everything. Weeks passed after the community performance, but the change in her life did not fade. It settled into something steady and real. The excitement from applause slowly turned into daily discipline again. She still woke up early to practice. She still stayed after school when the music room was free. The difference was not in how long she practiced. The difference was in how she felt while doing it. Before, she practiced to prove something. Now she practiced because she loved it. Her relationship with the piano had become deeper. She no longer rushed through pieces just to reach the end. She paid attention to small details. The softness of a note, the pause between phrases, the feeling behind each melody. Music was no longer about avoiding mistakes. It was about telling a story without words. At school, her confidence showed in quiet ways. She raised her hand more often in class. She spoke clearly during presentations. She walked through the hallways without lowering her eyes. She was still calm and gentle, but there was strength in her posture now. One afternoon, the teacher made an announcement that surprised everyone. The school had decided to start a small after-school music mentoring group. Older students who had shown strong improvement and commitment would help guide beginners. He looked around the classroom. "I would like you to be part of it," he said, looking directly at her. For a second, she almost looked behind her to see if he meant someone else. But he was clearly speaking to her. "Me?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied. "You understand what it means to grow. That matters." Those words meant more than any applause she had received. She agreed. The first mentoring session felt unfamiliar. A small group of younger students sat in front of her, holding sheet music with nervous expressions. Some struggled with basic rhythm. Others pressed the keys too hard or too softly. She recognized the fear in their eyes. She had felt it herself. Instead of correcting them sharply, she spoke gently. "It's okay to make mistakes," she told one student whose hands were shaking. "Let's slow it down together." She placed her hands beside theirs and showed them how to relax their wrists. She counted out loud, softly guiding the tempo. As the weeks went by, she saw progress in them. Small improvements, just like the ones she had once celebrated alone in her room. One day, after a mentoring session, a young student stayed behind. "I almost quit last week," the student admitted quietly. "But when I saw your video from the showcase, I thought maybe I could get better too." Her heart felt full hearing that. "You can," she said, "but you have to be patient with yourself." Later that evening, she thought about how close she had come to quitting herself. If she had removed her name from the audition list that day, none of this would have happened. The thought humbled her. Meanwhile, her teacher continued to guide her growth. He introduced her to more challenging pieces, not to test her limits harshly, but to stretch her ability gradually. "Confidence does not mean comfort," he reminded her once. "Keep challenging yourself." She appreciated the balance in his tone now. It was firm but fair. One afternoon, after a long practice session, she stayed behind in the empty auditorium. The lights were dim, and the rows of seats were empty again, just like during her early rehearsals. She walked onto the stage alone and sat at the piano. There was no audience, no pressure. She began to play. The music flowed easily. She was not thinking about being watched. She was not imagining applause. She was simply playing. Halfway through the piece, she paused and looked out at the empty seats. She smiled. This stage no longer felt intimidating. Felt familiar. She realized something important in that quiet moment. The real victory had not been shocking everyone with her performance. It had been shocking herself. She had once believed she was not good enough. She had once accepted someone else's judgment as final. But she had proven to herself that growth was possible. Toward the end of the school year, awards were given for various achievements. When the music award was announced, she did not expect to hear her name. There were many talented students, some with years of formal training. But when her name was called for Most Improved Musician, the room filled with applause once again. She walked to the stage calmly this time. There was no surprise in her expression, only gratitude. As she accepted the certificate, she noticed her teacher clapping along with everyone else. His expression carried quiet pride. After the ceremony, he approached her. "You earned this," he said. "Not because you were the most skilled at the beginning, but because you refused to stay where you started." She nodded. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she said. He gave a small smile. "Thank you for proving me wrong." It was a simple exchange, but it showed how much both of them had grown. At home that evening, she placed the certificate on her desk. But instead of staring at it for long, she turned back to her keyboard. Awards were nice. Recognition felt good. But the real reward was the music itself. As she played, she thought about the girl she used to be. The one who trembled when corrected. The one who almost erased her name from the list. The one who feared embarrassment more than failure. She felt proud of that girl, because that girl had chosen courage. In the months that followed, she began dreaming bigger. Not in a loud or unrealistic way, but in quiet possibilities. Maybe she could audition for regional competitions. Maybe she could apply for music workshops. Maybe one day she could even teach others more formally. But she did not rush those dreams. She understood now that progress comes step by step. One evening, while closing the lid of the piano after practice, she caught her reflection in the shiny surface. She saw someone steady, someone capable, someone who had faced doubt and grown through it. Her journey had started with ridicule. It had passed through embarrassment and long nights of practice. It had reached applause and recognition. But most importantly, it had ended with self-belief. And that was something no one could ever take away from her. The music continued to echo softly in her room long after her fingers left the keys. Not as a performance, but as proof of who she had become.